Hey everybody, Mike Lorrain here again. It's Saturday evening about 8:20 at the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show 2012. And I'm here to talk with David Thiel about sound. So, I just realized we lost the sound. You know what? You just got an example of what it would be like to play pinball without sound. So we're going to talk about how important sound and music is today in pinball with the person I consider the master of music and sound of the pin and arcade games, Mr. Thiel. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mr. Lorrain.
So let's just start out by talking about AC/DC. Since you took care of all the sound for this project, what can you tell us about it?
Well, obviously it's exciting to have a game based on sound assets like AC/DC. They're still touring, they're global, they have a huge inventory of hits, so picking 12 was a challenge. But it's not, how hard is it? Because there are way more than 12 AC/DC hits.
What, just real quick, what is your favorite AC/DC song, whether it's in the pin or not?
It is Thunderstruck.
You may continue.
So, but for a sound guy, when I do the audio packages for these things, I typically do it all. I write the music, and I create the sound effects, and edit everything, and then worry about anywhere between 600 and 1,200 voice clips, and I do the whole package. So when you do a license that's got all the music already, it's like, gee, that should be easier. It wasn't.
That's what you would think.
Yeah, you would think so. But one of the things in having AC/DC, and everybody knows how AC/DC tunes sound, so they want them to sound like they're coming out of a great stereo. But a pinball machine really isn't a great stereo. It's the speakers aren't located in the optimum locations. They aren't great speakers to begin with. They're mounted in an unusual manner. So when I started getting some feedback from my client, Steve Ritchie, come on the phone and say, "How come this doesn't sound better?" So I really spent a lot of time on this project that I normally would have spent writing music in exploring that question. What can I do to make AC/DC sound better coming out of the pin cabinet? And generally, how do I make the pinball cabinet from Stern sound better?
How do you make the devil sound really good?
Absolutely. I wanted Steve to really be maximum devil, which is really not that hard.
Well, as you know, it was officially announced this weekend about XMen. And obviously you are working on XMen. Is there anything that you feel you could share with us about what you're doing with that pin?
Yeah, well, I'm excited. I'm really excited about it. Unlike AC/DC, they've based this game on the comic books, not the 4 different animated series and not the 5 films, but the comic books, and comic books over about a 20-year span. XMen is the most popular group of characters, the most popular license that Marvel has, which I didn't know. I mean, I always do a lot of research for these projects. So these guys, and there's a new team of programmers that are working on XMen, some younger guys, and they're real fanboys.
And let me just interrupt for a second. Speaking of research, I don't think many people know this, but tell the audience, what have you done for research for XMen?
Well, let's see. So that I could speak with some authority on either the goodness or the lack of goodness in audio assets, I've watched about 50 out of the 120 animated series, Saturday morning cartoons. Of course, I've seen all 5 films multiple times. And for this project, I've read 120 comic books. They're published in bound collections now, so it's not hard to get your hands on them. And that was revealing and very interesting, because when you need to write a theme for Lady Deathstrike, it would be good to know who Lady Deathstrike is, what is her mutation if she has one, what is her power, is she good, is she bad, what is her weapon, What is her nature? You know, the more popular X-Men characters present obvious metaphors, like Storm is going to do stuff with the weather, Cyclops is going to blast things with his optic beam, which is not a laser, and so on. So I spent an awful lot of time in Wikipedia. There must be 150 Wikipedia pages on the X-Men universe. And you spend some time at the Marvel site too, but to get a grasp on a metaphor that's as wide and deep as X-Men, yeah. If you do an Iron Man game, there's Tony Stark. He's Iron Man. I'm done. If you do an X-Men game, the heroes and the villains just go on endlessly, and then the subset that were picked for the game is still significant. I can't think of a game I've never done a game in 14 games for Stern that had as many antagonists and protagonists. There's like 9 heroes and 9 villains, and then a mode for every one of them, and wizard modes, and multi-ball modes, and this game is wide and deep. It's really going to be a treat for a collector, or anybody who cares about the X-Men at all are really going to be pleased with this one.
That's great. Can you recap the team that's working on this project?
Yes, there's a new guy who's been at Stern for about a year. This is his first pin, a guy named Wei-Sin Cheng. And another guy who has been at Stern, was laid off when they had the big layoffs, had worked part-time and is now back full-time, a guy named Mike Kisavat. And those two have primary responsibility for the programming and the creative mode design for X-Men. Then they're being supported by Lyman and even Lonnie, or Lonnie and even Lyman a little. But primarily it's these guys. And these guys are young and wildly enthusiastic, and they're huge comic book fans. They were very important in Transformers, and even more so in X-Men. It's their vision, which is really this comic book, very faithful thing about the whole X-Men universe, is what's really driven the design of this game. So this game is unique as a modern pinball in that since it's not slavishly attached to a single film or a TV show, it's more like an original title than any licensed title I can think of in recent memory.
So in a way, it's kind of like a non-licensed theme?
It's almost like a non-licensed theme, because the way these things have been put together has been driven by the needs of the pinball game, more specifically than trying to adapt, let's say, well, some other movie license. This is good. This is unusual, and the results are turning out really well. So the dot art, for instance, there aren't any digitized video assets. The creative team, Mark Galvez, who's done all the dots since I've been involved with Stern, and that's since 2006, and he was doing it before that. He really has gotten to, he's a big comic book and X-Men fan as well, so he's come up with some really cool dot stuff, some stylistic things that utilize the comic book nature, the visual nature of comic books to do dots, the dots, the stuff that go on the electroluminescent display, to introduce modes, tell you about awards, do all that stuff, but it's really faithful to the whole X-Men comic book thing. It's cool.
So one last question. I know part of the process is that you receive a whitewood. And I would like you to take our audience through, try to think back to when the whitewood arrives, you unpack it, you set it up. What's the first thing what are the first things you do once you get it going to try to improve and work on the craft of what you're putting together?
The first thing I do is I usually, by this time I may or may not have gotten a prototype picture of what the playfield's actually going to look like, but I make sure I have one of those. Then I take a marker, and I take that picture and I go through and I hand label all the inserts. Anything that can light up, I put a name on it that will identify it for me. Because when you're trying to test the game and this thing's flashing, it's a flashy light. And so I label it. Ooh, that's the magneto flashy light, which tells me that mode is enabled, and that helps me be able to hand play the game and understand how the game is flowing and how the modes are starting and what I have to do to qualify modes to test things. It allows me to be a player. So hand labeling the game is the very first thing I do. And then I just have to flip it. And guys who design the games don't care about it as much about how it sounds initially while they're working on it, so they almost never have the glass on it. So if they're trying to get to a feature, they grab the ball and they hit targets with their hands and they do whatever it takes to access features.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at Tron, I mean, that spinning disc motor is really loud, and with the glass off, it'd be hard to hear anything.
Well, the glass does a bunch of stuff. One is, if you don't have the glass on, all the mechanical stuff, the flippers drown out everything. Pop bumpers, anything with a solenoid on it makes it very hard to hear the game. Then the glass also changes the overall tonal sound of the bass all of a sudden comes back. And when you get rid of all this mechanical stuff, you can now hear what the game's actually going to sound like. And that's the way I have to test it, which means if I want to test an advanced mode in the game, I actually have to be able to play the damn thing so that I can get to that. Which for wizard modes, I mean, I'm not that good a pinball player. I'm better than I was, but it's real challenging for me. In fact, sometimes I just have to request of them to send me a version of the code that after I hit the pop bumper 3 times, it takes me to a wizard mode, because I just can't get there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time with us. Is there anything else you'd just like to say?
Hi, Mom.
All right. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it. Best of luck with XMen.
Thank you.
Yeah.